1989, thousands of student demonstrators and their supporters amassed in the heart of Beijing, protesting for democracy for the Chinese people. On the night of July 3rd, the Chinese Communist Party ordered tanks into Tiananmen Square, and the flower of Beijing's educated youth were crushed under the treads of T-54s. 1 year later, another protest occurred, this time in Taipei's Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall. The torch had been passed, and now it was the turn of Taiwan's young and promising future to protest against their authoritarian regime. Instead of sending in tanks to grind his own people into the road, Taiwanese President Lee Teng-hui invited the leaders of the student movement into the presidential building, heard their concerns, and promised to implement their demands. 6 years later, Lee Teng-hui was re-elected, not by members of his own party, but by the general Taiwanese public, becoming the first democratically elected president in Taiwanese history. Today, the island nation of Taiwan boasts one of the most progressive societies on the Pacific Rim, but it was not always this way. The road to Taiwanese self-representation was a long and tumultuous one which winds through centuries of colonialism and decades of modern dictatorship. Welcome to our video on the modern history of Taiwan, in which we will explore how a country once under martial law blossomed into one of the healthiest democracies in all of Asia. The island of Taiwan, also known as Ilha Formosa, has been home to human civilization for at least 6,000 years. Its original inhabitants were Austronesian tribes, ancestrally related to many modern ethnic groups in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia and the Philippines, who lived a village lifestyle which centered around a form of ordered warfare based on ritual headhunting. Despite being only 100 miles off what is now the southern Chinese coastline, Taiwan existed outside of Chinese civilization's sphere of influence for much of the latter's dynastic history. From the 17th century onwards, the island was colonized by a carousel of foreign powers, beginning with the Dutch, then a rogue Chinese pirate king, then the Great Qing, an imperial Chinese dynasty founded by the northern Manchu people. It was only during Qing rule, as recently as around 200 years ago, that the island of Taiwan became predominantly Chinese in character, with vagabonds, adventurers and fortune seekers from Fujian province migrating by the thousands each year, and assimilating the indigenous tribes of the Western Plains. The version of Chinese society that came to dominate Taiwan during this time was heavily influenced by the regional culture of Fujian, the southern Chinese province from which the overwhelming majority of cross-strait migrants came. These migrants spoke the so-called dialects of Hokkien and Hakka, two Chinese languages which were mutually unintelligible with Mandarin, the language of the imperial court. Moreover, the high mountain indigenous tribes of the inaccessible eastern mountain ranges continued to resist assimilation, defending their ancestral lands and headhunting traditions. Overall, Taiwan during Qing rule was home to many different peoples with different cultures and languages, united only in the fact that they were all notoriously disloyal to the imperial government in Beijing. By the 19th century, Taiwan had become synonymous with anarchy, with both indigenous tribes and Fujianese settlers launching frequent insurrections against their Manchu overlords. Soon, the long-gowned ministers in the imperial court cynically began referring to the island by a popular idiom: every 3 years an uprising, every 5 years a rebellion. In 1895, the newly industrialized Empire of Japan thrashed the antiquated Manchurian dynasty in the First Sino-Japanese War. In the subsequent Treaty of Shimonoseki, China ceded a gift bag of goodies to Japan, including the island of Taiwan. Thus, from 1895 onwards, Taiwan entered a 50-year period as a Japanese colony. As a nation that had industrialized at a breakneck speed in order to catch up with the European powers of the age, Japan's goal was to turn Taiwan into a so-called model colony, in order to demonstrate their advanced technology to the West. To that end, the Japanese colonial government initiated a litany of reforms, which dramatically altered Taiwanese society in largely positive ways. The establishment of modern hospitals eliminated many tropical diseases like malaria and improved public health, while the introduction of railroads, running water, electricity, telephone lines and modern schools brought Taiwan out of the Middle Ages and into the 20th century. By the 1930s, Taiwan enjoyed a much higher standard of living than mainland China, much of which was still stuck in a pre-industrial state. With that said, the Taiwanese were still second-class citizens living under foreign occupation, All the highest levels in government were reserved for ethnic Japanese, and the Japanese military and police were swift in eradicating any dissent against their rule, killing tens of thousands of Taiwanese over the years. Throughout the early 20th century, Japanese troops marched into the eastern mountains and brought the last free indigenous villages to heel, putting a final end to their ancient headhunting rituals. Throughout the Second World War, an upsurge in state propaganda compelled thousands of young Taiwanese men to volunteer in the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces and fight in the Pacific Theater, where they saw battle against American and Australian troops.